Welcome, everyone, to Money 911, where we talk about the intersection of health, wealth, and peace of mind. Because true prosperity just isn't about numbers. It's about security, freedom, and the ability to live with confidence in an uncertain world. I'm your host, Kris Miller, founder of Healthy Money, Happy Life, a legacy wealth strategist who spent decades helping families and entrepreneurs protect what they've worked so hard to build. Today's conversation is one that every investor, every saver, and every family should be paying attention to. The world is shifting. We're seeing war and rising global tensions, central banks experimenting with digital currencies, nations questioning the dominance of the U.S. dollar, and markets react with massive volatility. In fact, since the last phase of global conflict began, more than $3 trillion has been wiped out of markets around the world. That's not just a number on a screen. That represents retirement accounts, business investments, and the financial future of millions of people. So, the question becomes, how do we protect our wealth in a world that feels increasingly unpredictable? My guest today is someone who has spent years studying these global monetary shifts and helping people understand how tangible assets may play a role in protecting their savings. Philip Patrick from Birch Gold Group joins us to talk about the changing financial landscape, from digital currencies and global debt to the renewed interest in gold as a potential safe harbor. This is not about fear. It's about education, awareness, and empowerment. Because when we understand how the financial system works, we can make wiser decisions for our families and our future. Philip, welcome back to Money 911. All right, Philip, it is an honor and pleasure to have you back again at Money 911.
The honor and pleasure is mine. Thank you, Kris.
Right. And I think the title of my show is quite appropriate for the times that we're in right now, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I would say absolutely, yes.
Right. Philip, everybody's watching the conflict in Iran, and it's really like, well, why does this matter so much for American homes?
It's a great question. Sometimes it's our tendency. This thing is happening far away, and does it affect us? And I mean, the answer is yes, but it's not just the war itself that's the issue. It's the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important choke points in the global economy. We have to remember it's roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow stretch of water. So when that flow is disrupted, energy prices don't just move in the Middle East, they move absolutely everywhere. And we're seeing that play out in front of us. Oil jumped to over $100 a barrel almost immediately after tanker traffic started to get interrupted. And, it's a very common misconception that I hear, right? America produces lots of oil, so this shouldn't affect us. We produce our own. But people have to understand it's not really how global energy markets work. Oil is priced globally. So when supply disappears anywhere, prices rise everywhere. What it probably means is we're not going to have supply shortages in the United States because we have enough domestically, but a shipping bottleneck in the Persian Gulf becomes a cost of living problem for us in the United States. And I think the longer this disruption lasts, the more pressure it's going to put on the global economy.
Exactly. Everybody looks at the gas prices, and it's so much more, like you just said, right? That fuel at the pump, and then the dilemma that it creates for the Fed, right?
It's a big problem across the board, right? First of
Yeah.
all, as you point out, because a lot of people think, well, energy is just gas at the pump, right? But
Hmm.
as you said, that's just the first domino. It sits at the base of every single supply chain, transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, construction, mine, just absolutely everything. So when we see oil prices rise sharply, that impacts spreads quickly across the entire economy. And we're starting to see it already just a few weeks in areas that people wouldn't necessarily expect: fertilizer shipments, industrial gases, chemicals, even the helium that they use in imaging and electronics. All of those prices have been increasing. They're small examples, but I think it shows how interconnected the global economy is.
Right. And, historically, during times of conflict and uncertainty, investors are looking for the safe harbor assets, right? And obviously, it's 5,000 years, gold and precious metals has always been the safe haven. But now all of a sudden everybody's realizing and they're kind of looking at, oh, I missed the boat. Look how much has gone up. What is it, 110? Gold has gone up 110% or
Yeah, it's
something like,
significant. It was 70 last year, 20
yeah.
years this year, so we're getting close. Yeah.
But it isn't about the price, right?
Very, very smart point. It's ultimately what's driving the price. Gold price is very different. Gold is a reflection of currency. If currency devalues, gold will keep going up. I always give a very extreme example. World War One Germany, an ounce of gold was 178 German Reichsmarks. Germans have hyperinflation, they print money. Anyway, 10 years later, an ounce of gold was 87 trillion German Reichsmarks. Okay. So that's an extreme example. It's hyperinflation, but it demonstrates a point. Gold is a reflection of the value of currency. So when people say don't look at price, doesn't mean buying high doesn't matter. What it's implying is gold is a reflection of the state of the economy. So look at what's happening now. We have wars in the Middle East. We have wars in Europe. We have inflation that's persistent. We have a world that's running from the dollar. We have, these problems create the perfect storm for precious metals. Now, I don't think it's a case of people taking everything they have and buying gold and silver. This isn't about panic, it's about preparation. And I think it's just people need to have today a store of value that sits outside of the paper system, and just look at diversifying. At the end of the day, nobody has a crystal ball. We can
Right.
look at the past, but nobody knows exactly how this thing's going to pan out. And I think that in on itself is a reason to diversify. And when your problems are war, devaluation, this sort of counter cyclical play of gold becomes very appropriate for the climate. And that's all we're seeing.
Right. It's so crazy when like trillions of dollars just disappear from the market. And then it raises this deeper question: are the markets more fragile than most people think? Because everybody's just, you get up, you got to go to work, and hardly anybody's really paying attention to that, right?
It's really, listen, it's everyday life. I have to do it as well. Luckily, my job is looking at the gold market. So the two just manage to go hand in hand. But for most people, fortunately, they're doing much more important things for society, like teaching and everything else. So
Yeah.
that's a common thing. Look, I think there are problems all over the economy. I think the big ones are debt, deficit. Those ultimately are unsolvable. And like I said, I'm not going to try and predict the markets one way or the
Mhm.
other. It's impossible for me or anybody to do. But like I said, I think the prudent thing in this climate is to make sure that we diversify. And like I said, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but when your problems are inflation and currency devaluation, you need an asset that's counter cyclical, something that goes up during tough times. And that's what precious metals do. I certainly wouldn't suggest somebody, sold everything they had in the markets. That's not the idea at all. It's
Right.
just about making sure you're diversified. And I think precious metals really allow for that.
Is there a percentage that you might lean towards? No, that's recommending.
Listen, everybody's so different, right? Comfort level has to be the driving force. Like a big
Right.
part of
That's good.
It
Yeah.
really does. Look, a big part of diversification is to make sure you can sleep at night, right? So
Yeah.
for me to suggest a percentage of somebody else's retirement they should move, that's not the idea. You want to
Right.
make sure you have some diversity and you want to make sure that anything you do is comfortable and it allows you to sleep better at night. And as long as that's happening, it's probably the right thing.
Right. A lot of the people that I talk to, I'm helping them plan their retirement or have money that creates income for them. But people are nearing retirement and they're still in risk, a lot of risk in the Wall Street casino. Again, what would you recommend, right, to them in that situation?
Look, I think the idea, first of all, is you get educated, which is what they're
There
doing
you go.
right
Yeah.
now. That's the most important thing because
Right.
I think when you have a good understanding of the problems, the solutions will present themselves. I would tell people not to panic, right? Because I think fear and panic lead to knee-jerk reactions, which 9 times out of 10 are not good. Um, or don't end well, I should say. So I
Yeah.
think it is about being prudent, staying educated, and like I said, making defensive moves to make sure you're diversified. Listen, the world's getting tougher. The middle class is disappearing. I read a
Right.
statistic the other day that, the top 1% of the United States control 37% of GDP, the
Yep.
bottom 50%, 2.5. That's a problem longer term. So
Yep.
no surprise people are feeling the pinch. Our Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, wrote a very good article in the Wall Street Journal talking about the Fed's gain of function. But I think he explains very well how through monetary policy, they've gutted the middle class. So we have
Mm.
issues. Like I said, one of the biggest issues we have today is a purchasing power problem, right? We have inflation that's persistent, money sitting in a bank account in any currency is almost guaranteed to lose to real rates of inflation in the current climate. And like I said, that used to be our safe haven. If we were worried about instability in the economy, we could park it in cash and sort of grow steadily. But when your issues are inflation, dollar devaluation, sitting in cash carries a lot of risk itself. And like I said, I think that's where precious metals are coming in. What I would say to people is you should probably think about getting a portion, whatever portion's comfortable for you, of your retirement in metals to hedge inflation, to hedge currency decline. I think dollar decline will be a persistent long-term issue. Nothing's linear, so it's not just going to go like that. It'll go like
Right.
this and this.
Right.
But I think long term, from a debt and deficit standpoint, we've given ourselves an almost unsolvable problem. That's why central banks around the world are buying gold in record quantities. By the way, last quarter of last year was the single biggest year for central banks in history. So they're buying larger quantities in the current climate. And I would say to people, you can take what I say with the pinch of salt. I'm a guy, but if central banks around the world are setting record after record, it tells you something's changing. And like I said, it's just a case of diversification, not panic.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said. You think the bricks are recreating themselves now? Is there still an issue with that?
The bricks are pushing. Yeah, look, the bricks are de-dollarizing. US dollar holdings by central banks are at 35-year lows. Gold became the number two global reserve asset last year. It overtook the euro. Even with all that gold buying, it's only 20% of global reserve currency. If you went back to the 80s, it was over 70%. And I want to make a broader point here. It's conceptual, but I think it's important. Look, for most of human history, gold was the standard for an international currency. And the reason it was is that for most of human history, countries broadly haven't trusted each other, right? So,
Right.
like, why would we hold a huge amount of Chinese yuan when the Chinese government could print it, devalue it, and we're left holding the bag? So, for most of history, because countries didn't trust each other, gold was the standard. Well, something changed in the 80s. The world felt that we had transitioned. You had philosophers like Francis Fukuyama talking about the end of history. There would be no more war, right? And the reason was is that the world broadly trusted each other now. And when the trust broke down, America was there to police it. So what happened in the 80s is the world transitioned away from gold as the standard towards debt, and specifically US government debt. Well, I think that illusion has been shattered. First of all, the trust has been broken through asset seizures and sanctions and everything else. The world broadly now doesn't trust each other. Secondly, and I think more importantly, debt as an investment isn't really viable for the rest of the world. Debt to GDP in the United States is 124% today. Like, that is not a currency long term that feels soft. So my point is, I think the world is now transitioning back to what was always the standard. So this is why I think long term the trend will continue. BRICS will trade amongst themselves in their own currencies, and I think gold will take a larger share of reserves, both chipping away at the dollar's dominance is my concern.
Absolutely. And you just answered my mic drop question, which was if the dollar's based on trust, what happens when trust starts to crack, right?
And that it's such a good point, such a good question that you had, because that's all it is. It's trust
Mm,
and promises. And this is the climate where the trust is breaking. It's happening across. It's not just us and the BRICS, it's Europe. The world is fracturing into blocks. And sadly, my fear is we have the most to lose from that. The United States is
yep.
25% of the world's GDP. Up until recently, we had 60% of the world's capital. So, if we start to diversify more, we have the most to lose, being the biggest economy, the largest share, and everything else.
Whew.
I
So
know.
go ahead.
I was going to say, I know it's depressing. Imagine having to live in this. It's tough.
Yeah, you know too much too. I mean, because you're watching like whoa, like a roller coaster. But it is what it is, and then people think, oh, let's just go digital, and so the biggest financial experiment is in modern history with this digital currency, right? And how does that all fit in there?
Let's see how it goes. Like this right now is speculation. I share your kind of feelings. I think
Yeah,
long term, governments are looking for more control over money,
right.
right? And I think the world is moving more digital anyway. So I think long term, it's probably an area they're going to look at. And as you know, I'm sure governments around the world have done trials and other things. Right now, the United States is saying, hey, this is not something we're even considering. I don't think under a Trump administration it's going to happen. But long term,
Right.
it feels like we're heading. Now, the people in the United States are not ready for that. I don't think we would accept it. What would make us more open to that? Maybe significant devaluation of the existing currency. So if we continue to head down this path, maybe in the future it's launched on us, the government step in as the saviors with a new currency. So we'll
Right.
see how it progresses. I think long term it's where they're heading, but there's nothing tangible right now.
Right. 5,000 years, gold has survived every monetary system humanity's ever created, right? I mean, it's kind of it's so interesting, really. I mean, that's a lot of different civilizations.
It's a long time, and the reason being is like paper money is paper money. It has no value. Listen, the history of currency is a history of devaluation and destruction. That's it. No currency thrives over long periods of time. And that's where gold comes in. It's a commodity. Now, you could hedge the dollar with wheat or pork bellies. They're also commodities. And when the dollar goes down, they go up. Try storing a million pork bellies, right? It's a problem. Try storing, a million bushels of wheat. It's a
Right.
problem. Be great. So there's a reason gold has been the commodity of money for so long.
Yeah.
There's a reason. Listen, even I was a banker at the turn of the century. If you'd asked me about gold, I would have said, "You're crazy. What are you looking about gold?"
Right.
Today, I've realized it sustains, and it sustains because money loses value long term, and it always does. And watching what central banks are buying today confirms it, right? They're not worried
Yeah.
about the dollar and buying Bitcoin. They're not worried about the dollar and buying bushel. They're buying gold for the
Yeah.
same they always have.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, another mic drop for you. So, and I know, it's hard to speculate, right? But if you had to summarize the next 10 years of a global, the whole system that's happening, what would you say?
So that is a tough one
I
because
know.
Listen, like I said, and I hate to say this, but look, Ferguson's law. This is where I'm so negative. So Ferguson is Niall Ferguson, a very famous British historian. Ferguson's law has been true of every empire in history, and it is this simply: when any great nation spends more on debt service than defense, the empire will collapse. And debt service just means the annual interest payments on the debt. We did it last year. It was 1.13 trillion on debt service, 800 billion on defense. And look, the position we're in, amassing debt, printing money, every empire in history gets there, not one has recovered from. So knowing that the deficit has expanded over the last 2 years, not retracted, and this administration had a focus on it, if they couldn't close the gap, I don't know who can, because the previous didn't even think it was a problem. So,
Right.
so, so I think broadly the problem is unsolvable, but still the biggest economy in the world. The dollar is still the tallest midget in the room. Pardon
Right.
the expression. It's the best of a bad bunch. So I
Yeah.
think for now it's a case of managing the pace of decline. That's where
Well said.
I have to speculate. The president can make two or three good decisions and they buy us some time. He can make two or three bad decisions and the problem escalates and that window shuts. And this is where it's really tough to see. And this is where policy becomes really difficult, right? Like, for example, what did Trump want to do? He wanted to close the deficit, right? So he needs to bring revenue in. That's tariffs. It's raising not raising taxes, stimulating economic growth. Tariffs was his big revenue generator and the Department of Government Efficiency. Um, oh, I lost my train of thought. Uh, darn, it's gone. Um, what I was, I think, trying to say is, oh yeah, I'm saying policy has second and third order effects. So we have a revenue problem. Let's fix it. Let's charge people to access our markets. The problem is, in the process, we frustrated our trading partners, right? We
Right.
want
Right.
Greenland, right? So we went to Davos saying we're going to get Greenland. How did the Europeans respond? They said, we're going to dump your debt. What did
Hmm.
that do? It raised borrowing costs and debt service. And that's what I mean.
Mm.
Every decision, even if it's good, has second and third order effects, which make this really complicated and really difficult to predict.
Wow, that makes sense. So, if people, so, we went forward, now we're looking back, say, 20 years. And when people look, historians look back at this time about this moment in not only financial history, but, global, it's pretty pivotal. What would they say about this time?
It pivotal is the word to use, and I think a lot changed with
Mhm.
COVID. I think that had a big effect because that's where there was a ton of stimulus. So if you look at what the Black Swan event was, I think it really started there. That was the big, well, maybe '08 actually, but that was the beginning of really escalating the pace of decline. So I think that's what they'll say. This was the turning point, right? It was a problem that developed slowly and then very, very quickly. This is a pivotal moment in history, and I think it's very important that we make the right decisions at a governmental level. And I think they're trying their hardest to do it. But for the reason I mentioned before, it's a very difficult task. So
Right.
we're just going to have to see how we go.
Right. Keep fluid. You know, Unfortunately, so many people are feeling the anxiety and the future of money and the state of the world, the wars, rumors of wars. What three calm things, rational steps can they do to protect their financial future?
Look, I think the first and the most important thing to do is just to get as educated as you can on finances. Look,
Right.
you said it earlier. Most people are doing much more important things. They're looking after their children, they're teaching, helping. They're like I said, we need less finance professionals and more people like that in the world.
Right.
But so we applaud that absolutely. But if you have one eye on retirement, you got this sort of this becomes very important, and people have to understand everyone's a little bit self-interested. I worked for Birch Gold Group, right? We want you
Right.
to buy gold at Birch Gold Group, right?
Right.
And
Right.
somebody
Right.
down the road who's dealing with something else wants you to buy that, right?
Right.
At some point, you have to listen to what everybody has to say. You analyze it and you say, what makes sense for me? So education is the biggest part of it. From there, I would say it's about being as much as possible preemptive and not reactive, right? Things are holding pretty well right now. Some people would say, well, that's not the time to diversify. I argue differently. It's exactly the time to diversify. What we don't want to do is wait for something dramatic to happen and then react in hindsight, because oftentimes the ship has sailed at that point. So being preemptive as much as possible, I think, is key. And the third thing I said before, I stick to: don't panic. There's a lot out there that there's some scary stuff in the world. There's no question about it. But ultimately, we're going to be okay, right? And I think that panic just clouds the decision-making process, and it just isn't helpful. So it's hard not to sometimes, but remember, there's a lot of fear. Certainly, there's no smoke without fire. There are big problems out there, but there's also a lot of fearmongers out there as well. So try and stay away from that. Be rational. We will get through it. The question is how we end up on the other side. And I think as much as possible, if we're prudent, we're defensive, we're preemptive, we're going to be just fine.
Well, beautiful said. And, and I've been doing this for 36 years, and I'm just taking everything that I've learned and creating a, financial wellness program called Create Income You'll Never Outlive. So that was the first thing you said, educate. Because what I saw or see is that you go to school, learn how to make money, get out of school. What do? Go make money and give it to some guy to gamble. And when people get to their third, fourth quarter of life, they start their retirement plan. I mean, they have no idea. And so everything that you said can give everybody peace of mind on their healthy money, right?
That's the hope. If I can do that, then this was a success.
Yes. And having you here has been that. Philip, great to have you again. We'll look forward to having you back on another round where we'll see where we're at that time. Again, I thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Kris.
All right. Philip, thank you for sharing your insights today. One thing I always remind people is that money is never just about markets or headlines. It's about peace of mind. It's about knowing that the life you built, the people you love, and the future you're working toward have a foundation that can withstand uncertainty. Throughout history, economies have changed, currencies have evolved, and financial systems have shifted. But the individuals who thrive through these changes are the ones who stay informed, stay thoughtful, stay proactive. Today's conversation is really an invitation for listeners to ask deeper questions about how their wealth is positioned in a rapidly changing world. If you'd like to learn more about the role physical gold may play in diversifying a portion of your savings, Birch Gold Group has put together a free informational kit explaining how gold can be held inside certain retirement accounts. You can email me directly at Kris@legacyshifters.com. That's KRIS at legacy, LEGACY, shifters, SHIFTERS.com. There'll also be a link for those of you watching YouTube. You can go right there. There is no obligation, just an opportunity to learn more. And as always, the goal of this show is simple: to help you move from uncertainty to clarity, from stress to peace of mind, and from financial confusion to confident action. Thank you for joining us on Money 911. Until next time, I'm Kris Miller, wishing you health, wealth, and a truly happy life.
I've created the Safe Money Blueprint. This is the same strategy that thousands of my clients have used to feel secure about their financial future. And you can get it free at healthymoneyhappylife.com/blueprint.
There's so much to learn about healthy money. I hope today's discussion brings you one step closer to securing and protecting your future, so you can get started on the right foot Go to meetwithkrismiller.com and schedule your free financial fitness strategy session. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to Money 911 so you don't miss our next episode, which includes health, wealth, and peace of mind.